Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read a lightly edited version of Cave Regions of the Ozarks and Black Hills by Luella Agnes Owen, published in 1898. The book will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 3, Episode 44. Content note: if by some chance you feel inspired to investigate any locations mentioned, please keep in mind that they may not be currently accessible to the public. Some are operated as commercial caves and have been noted as such where appropriate. This book was written quite some time ago and therefore does not necessarily reflect current-day outlooks and language choices. The scientific texts may use outdated terminology or be inaccurate in light of more recent discoveries. This podcast was created primarily to help you relax and to entertain you. The texts are chosen for their ability to charm and interest you, rather than for educational purposes. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you have a moment to leave us a review on iTunes, it would help other listeners find us. You can also hear our episodes on YouTube. If you are listening there, please like our episodes and leave a comment for us. We'd love to hear from you. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. Chapter 2, Marble Cave. A quick note from your host in 2023. This cave is now known as Marble Cave and is open to the public as part of Silver Dollar City. Marble Cave, which is the finest yet explored in Missouri, is southeast of the center of Stone County, a short distance north of the picturesque White River. The nearest station is Marionville on the St. Louis and San Francisco Railroad, and the drive of 40 miles is delightful, but can be divided into 2 of 20 each by a stop at Galena. The road, for the most part, is naturally macadamized and is through a most charming country whose roughness and beauty increase together as the journey advances. At first, it winds along fertile valleys between wooded hills, crossing many times a shallow stream of water so clear as to afford no concealment for an occasional water moccasin. The second week in May found the vegetation in its summer beauty. Strawberries were ripe, and the weather without a fault. Galena is pleasantly situated on the hills overlooking the James River, and is entirely invisible from the road by which it is approached until a slight curve in the line of ascent ends the first half of the journey with surprising suddenness. In the immediate vicinity there are several small caves which are worthy of attention and will be described later on. To properly picture the 20 miles of changing and charming views between Galena and Marble Cave would require the light and skillful touch of a special artist gifted with a tangible perception of atmospheric values. Gradually, the road forsakes the pretty valleys with their fields and streams to take the summit of the hills and then be known as the Ridge Road, which affords a wide range of vision not previously enjoyed, presenting scenes not to be found reproduced elsewhere with any degree of exactness. Looking into the depth of the forest as it slopes away on either side, the impression is of a magnificent park, undefaced by what are called improvements. This effect is produced by the scarcity or entire absence of underbrush, and a beautiful surface covering of grasses or flowering plants of all kinds and colors, varied here and there with masses of ferns of unusual size and delicate beauty. The most unexpected and lavish feature of the rich display is the many miles of fragrant honeysuckle that grows only 18 inches high in the forest shade, but if transplanted to a sunny spot, develops into the familiar vine. The most beautiful portion of all this is called the wilderness, and seems designed for a national park. Such a park reserve, even if very small, could not fail to be a lasting pleasure, since it would be more accessible to large centers of population than other reserves, and its most delightful seasons are spring and autumn, when the Yellowstone is under snow. The distant view obtained through open spaces is an undulating forest in all directions, being apparently both trackless and endless. The great variety of greens observed in the foliage blends in the distance into one dark shade, then changes to dark blue, which gradually fades out to a hazy uncertainty where it is lost at the skyline. As long ago as 1853, the variety and abundance of the natural growth of fruits throughout the Ozarks was observed by Professor Swallow, who then advised the planting of vines. Beyond the wilderness is the Marble Cave property, and the entrance to the cave is through a large sinkhole in the top of Rourke Mountain. This hole is said to be about 200 feet long, 100 feet wide, and 35 feet deep. It is shaped like a great oblong bowl with sloping sides, divided irregularly near the middle, and having the bottom broken out in a jagged way that is very handsome, and gives an ample support to the growth of ferns, wild roses, and other vegetation with which it is abundantly decorated. About half of the descent into the basin is accomplished by scrambling down the roughly broken rocks, and the balance by a broad wooden stairway ending at a narrow platform that supports the locked gate. For kind and valuable assistance rendered to ensure the success and pleasure of the visit to the wonderful cave, which they regard with affection and pride, very cordial thanks are due to Captain T. S. Powell, former manager, his son Mr. Will Powell, the first guide, and Mr. Fred Prince, who has made the only official survey and map. It may be stated here that the survey and map are far from complete, and many known passages have never yet been entered. Being the first visiting party of the season, certain disadvantages were encountered in a great accumulation of wet clay and rubbish washed in by the rains since the previous summer, but the gate was opened with considerable effort, and slowly and cautiously we descended the slippery, clay-banked stairs to the immense mound of debris 45 feet below the gate, to behold at last the grandeur of the auditorium. The magnificence of that one chamber should give to Marble Cave a worldwide fame, even if there were nothing more beyond. The blue-gray limestone walls have a greater charm than those of an open canyon, owing to the fact that they sweep away from any given point in long, true curves to form an elliptical chamber 350 feet long by 125 wide, with the vault above showing absolute perfection of arch, and measuring by the survey from its lowest to its highest point, 195 feet. These measurements are said to be indisputably correct, and if so, the auditorium of Marble Cave is the largest unsupported perfect arch in the world, it being 100 feet longer than the famous Mormon Tabernacle at Salt Lake City. In addition to the artistic superiority of architectural form, its acoustic properties having been tested, it is found to be truly an auditorium. The curving walls and pure atmosphere combine to aid the voice and carry its softest tones with marvelous distinctness to every portion of the immense enclosed space. As a concert hall, its capacity has been tested by musicians who are said to have been enthusiastic over the success of their experiments. Several years ago, a piano was lowered into the cave for use on a special occasion and still occupies a position on the dancing platform, where it will probably remain indefinitely under the scant protection of a small canvas tent. The chief ornament of the auditorium is the white throne, a stalagmitic mass that, when viewed from the stairway, appears to rest solidly against the most distant wall, and looks so small an object in that vast space as to render a realization of its actual measurement impossible. The height of the throne is 65 feet, and the girth 200. It is a mass of dripstone resting on a limestone base reserved from the ancient excavation to receive it, and on careful inspection the perpendicular lines observed on the front are found to be a set of rather large organ pipes. A fresh fracture shows the throne to be a most beautiful white and gold onyx. The outer surface has now received a thin coating of yellow clay, which was, of course, regretted, but later observations on onyx building reveals the pleasing fact that if the crystal-bearing waters continue to drip, the yellow clay will supply the coloring matter for a golden band of crystal. The throne is hollow and has a natural opening in one side by which it may be entered, but the space within is too limited to invite a lengthy stay. That portion of the outside which is nearest the wall is formed with sufficient irregularity of outline to admit of an ascent to the top, and the view obtained is well worth the difficult scramble up and the apprehensive slide down. Being raised so high above all objects that divide attention or in some degree obstruct the view, permits a freedom of outlook that sensibly increases the appreciation of the vastness of the enclosed chamber and its enclosing walls. Efforts to establish the age of the deposit by observations on the yearly growth would afford little satisfaction, for the obvious reason that conditions governing the growth are dependent in a measure on each season's vegetation. Deposit began, of course, after the erosion of the chamber ceased, and therefore represents only a fraction of the age of the cave itself. About 30 feet west of the White Throne, and against the wall, stands the next onyx attraction in the form of a beautiful fluted column nearly 20 feet high, tapering up from a base 3 feet in diameter and known as the Spring Room Sentinel, because the Spring of Youth is just behind it, although not directly connected with the auditorium, it being the first chamber on the left in Total Depravity Passage, a wet and dangerous way of which next to nothing is known, but the entrance to which is a fine arch a few feet west of the Sentinel. The Spring of Youth is reached by climbing through a window-like opening, and is very small, very wet, very cold, and very beautiful. It is not more than 10 feet high, nor 6 in its greatest length and breadth, but every inch of its irregular surface is composed of dripstone of a bright yellowish red and colorless crystal, and down the glittering walls trickles clear and almost ice-cold water to the onyx floor, where it is caught and held in a marvelous fluted bowl of its own manufacture. This is said to be the gem of the whole cave, and seems to have been placed where it is for the consolation of those who are unable to enjoy the peculiar grandeur of the auditorium, and leave it, as some actually are said to do, with a sense of disappointment, because it is not the gleaming white hall of marble which some writers for reputable journals have allowed their imaginations to create. In winter, the Spring of Youth room takes on a complete coating of ice, with icicles of all sizes hanging from the ceiling and projections. The effect is described as being wonderfully beautiful. Further down Total Depravity Passage we are not urged to go, because at that season of the year it is wet and difficult, without any sufficient promise of a brilliant compensation for the achievement of such a journey. But the Spring of Youth room, or as it is generally called, the Spring Room, is more than ample justification for the existence of the passage, and would still be if that passage were several miles in length and the attraction located at the most distant limit. The various passages in Marble Cave are by no means alike or even similar, some having been opened by the action of water assisted only by acid carried in solution, while others are the unmistakable crevices of earthquake origin, afterwards enlarged, or perhaps only remodeled, as we might say, by the water's untiring energy in changing the position of rock masses without obliterating evidences of original design. A glance at the map shows the sudden breaking off of the various passages represented. The end, however, is not of the passages themselves, but only of the exploration or the survey of them, and there is a possibility that future developments will lead to the discovery of more caves than are yet known. However that may be, the glimpses already had into the beyond are said to be alluring. To the north of the auditorium, which was until recently called the Grand Amphitheater, there opens out a kind of alcove extension known as the Mother Hubbard Room, and spreading out from this is the corridor, a room about 125 feet long and 75 feet in width, with a long, narrow passage, or crawl, leading from the northeast into the grotto, a dome-shaped room formerly called the Battery, on account of the great number of bats that used to congregate in it. It is about 40 feet in diameter and 50 feet in height. On one side of this room is a narrow squeeze opening into a passage several feet lower than the floor level of the grotto and leading to the Spanish room, which, when discovered, bore indications of having been occupied by a human being who had tried to escape by tunneling or by reaching a hole in the roof, which is said to be impossible for him to have done without outside assistance. As no bones have been found, we may hope the assistance arrived in time. When the discovery of the room was made, a quantity of loose rock was piled before the entrance, so if he ever escaped, it was not by that way. After crawling back to the corridor, through the same small but dry passage of 70 feet length, we saw a narrow ledge of fine crystals, a deposit of Epsom salts, and a few bats that in the dim light looked white but are a light tan color with brown wings. A good specimen hanging on a projecting ledge of the wall remained undisturbed by us and our lights, giving an opportunity for careful inspection, so that we presently discovered it to be a mummy, which naturally suggests that this portion of the cave, being dry and opening out of the great temple-like auditorium as an alcove, could be converted into an imposing crypt. Making our way across the room to its southwest extremity over a varied assortment of boulders and down a drop of 8 or 10 feet, we crawled into another tight-fitting dry passage lined with beautiful, glittering, onyx-like clear ice banded with narrow lines of red, of which broken fragments covered the narrow floor and made a dazzling but distressingly painful rug to crawl over. This is the west passage and leads to the grand crevice, of which only a small portion has been surveyed. Midway of the passage are the Epsom rooms, 2 in number and well supplied with Epsomite or native Epsom salts. This is sometimes called the windy passage on account of a rushing current of air met suddenly at the first bend, and no doubt due to the meeting here of fresh air coming in from the outside with that chemically changed in the Epsom rooms. The cave contains a great many dangerous places, as we correctly surmised on the morning of our introduction, when Mr. Powell's blessing on the breakfast was lost in so fervent a prayer for the safe and successful accomplishment of our undertaking. It seemed inconsiderate not to present the reassuring appearance of inexhaustible endurance. In the corridor can be seen one of the 3 old Spanish ladders found in the cave when it was rediscovered. But when and for what purpose the Spaniards used the cave, there seems to be no means of finding out. It should be remembered that this part of the United States was occupied first by the Spaniards and then by the French, and is a portion of the Louisiana Purchase. The French offered to make the sale on account of being thoroughly discouraged with constant troubles arising with the indigenous residents, whom they had decided it would be impossible to persuade or compel to recognize any laws other than those established by each tribe for itself, or accepted by friendly treaty with the council and disregarded by individuals on both sides. And the United States accepted the offer, not for any expected value in the land, but for the unrestricted navigation of the Mississippi River. Therefore, Missouri was never under British rule and never changed hands by force of arms. But to return to the Spanish ladder, it is a tall pine tree notched on the sides for steps, and the stump of a branch left or a peg inserted at considerable intervals for hand supports to assist in raising the weight of the body. Returning to the auditorium, we entered a passage behind the great white throne and started on what might well be called the water route, for no dry spot is touched on the round trip. But if one goes prepared for such a journey, it is well worth the effort and the mud. If the visitor is a man, the suit worn should be one he is ready to part with, or overalls. Ladies receive the same advice, even to the overalls, as some of the most beautiful portions of the cave, which we failed to see, can be visited only in that objectionable costume. To visit any cave comfortably, a short dress is necessary, and if anything like a thorough knowledge of the ramifications is desired, the unavoidable climbing will soon prove the superior claims of a divided skirt. But if it is properly made, only the wearer need be conscious of the divide. Rubber boots and waterproof protection for the head and shoulders complete a costume that is not exactly an artistic creation, unless our ideas of art have been gathered in the school of Socrates, but it is suited to the requirements of the occasion and makes the explorations far more easy and profitable than they otherwise could be. The passage back of the white throne is called the Serpentine Passage, and most of it is sufficiently high for traveling in an erect position, yet there are several places that require crawling. The first stopping point is the Gulf of Doom room, or, as it is also known, the Register room, because here visitors usually write their names in the peculiar dark red clay, which is moist but firm and cuts with a polish. This room is 25 feet high and 50 feet wide and looks off into the Gulf of Doom, which seems rightly named when a rock is thrown into it and you note the lapse of time before any sound returns. And when the awful gulf is made visible by lights thrown in, one involuntarily seeks a firmer footing and clings to a projecting rock. The height of the gulf is 95 feet, and the distant sound of falling water is not reassuring. The walls are not smoothly worn away, but have the rough and weird appearance of having been torn by a torrent in a narrow mountain gorge, and are stained with the dark clay. Retracing our steps a short distance, if that style of locomotion could be called steps, we turned into Doré's gallery, and surely that artist was in his usual working mood when he conceived this awful method of connecting the upper regions with the lower. Great boulders have fallen down without helping to fill the black holes that received them, and into this real inferno we proceeded to descend by narrow ladder-like stairs provided with a light handrail, and trembling slightly with the responsibility they assumed. If anyone's courage trembled too, no notice was taken of it, and a record of exploring experiences does not necessarily include a confession of any doubts. On all the ladders in this gallery was a fine white fungus growth in the form of a thick, heavy mold that the lightest touch destroyed. In caves where some care is taken to protect this mold, it attains a growth of 6 or more feet and assumes the forms of seaweed. Once down the first and longest flight of stairs, without any signs of a Doré dragon raising its huge body by heavy claws to a resting place among the rocks, awe divides more evenly with admiration, and being already well besmeared with mud, we climbed over the clay-covered boulders and crawled through narrow holes with perfect satisfaction, enjoying each novel scene to the utmost. Off from the Doré Gallery is a small chamber containing the Fountain of Youth that must be seen, but the way, like that of the transgressor, is hard. Arrived at the entrance, we hesitated a moment, for although getting in looked possible, the way out again seemed not so simple. But finally trusting to Providence, through the direct agency of our careful guardians, of course, we sat down on the edge of the large slippery boulder on which we stood, and reaching out, caught a projection of the wall on one side and a boulder crag on the other, swung off, and dropped into the soft mud below. This chamber proved to be a little gem, small but high, and beautifully adorned with calcite crystal. Down a wall of red onyx on one side, clear water flows into a basin in the irregular rocky floor, just behind the boulder we had used for a handrest at the entrance. The perfectly transparent water in the basin appears to be only a few inches deep, but measures 3 feet, and is several degrees colder than the air, which in this portion of the cave is warm. The other wall of this room is an almost perpendicular bank of the soft dark red clay, in which small selenite crystals are sprouting like plants in a garden. Suddenly we heard a heavy rolling noise like distant thunder, and asking if it were possible to hear a thunderstorm so far below the surface, were told it was the protest of angry bats against a further advance on the quarters to which they have retreated from the main body of the cave, and their orders were obeyed. So of what may be in that direction we gained no positive knowledge besides bats, and the fact that, small as they are, their great numbers make them dangerous when angry. Returning to the gallery and continuing the journey down over slippery rock and slender ladders, we came at length to the bottom of the Gulf of Doom, into which we had looked from the room now high above us, and we needed no stimulating help to the imagination to pronounce it a fit termination to an artist's troubled dream. Then, climbing over an assortment of boulders of all sizes, going up a little, and swinging or sliding down, we came to a point in the narrow passage where the floor is a flat slab, like a large paving stone, tilted up at a steep angle against one wall, and not reaching the other by about 15 inches, with darkness of unknown depth below. About 3 feet above this opening the wall projects in a narrow shelving ledge, and everything is covered with a thin coating of slippery wet clay. The only way to cross that uninviting bridge is to brace the feet against the slab and, leaning on the ledge, slowly work across. A little more rough work, and the descent of the 2 short ladders brought us, at last, under the beautiful waterfall, where we stood as in a heavy shower of rain at the lowest point yet reached in the cave, which, according to the survey of Mr. Prince, is 400 feet below the surface. The falling water has ornamented the walls, which in this portion of the cave expose over 200 feet of magnesian limestone with unique forms of dripstone, and the steeply sloping floor has received the overcharge of calcium carbonate until it has become a shining mass of onyx, retaining pools of cold, transparent water in the depressions. In the lowest corner there is only mud, and above it rises, to a height of at least 15 feet, a bank of miry yellow clay, at the top of which a hole in the wall is the only known entrance to Blondie's throne. Chapter 3. Marble Cave Continued. On account of the long crawl through mud and cold water, it was at first suggested and then strongly advised that we should not undertake to make the trip to Blondie's throne, and yearning to see what is considered the cave's chief beauty was not easy to overcome. But after careful attention to the deep mire of the approach, the advice seemed good, especially as Mr. Powell kindly promised to write a description of its trials and treasures, which he promptly did, thereby making it possible for us to continue the journey now without a disappointing interruption. So we will proceed to wade that mud bank with him in his own way. He says, quote, "When the subject is mentioned to the guide, he shrugs his shoulders and assumes an imploring look, and begins at once to mention the difficulties of getting there. But if you insist upon it, he will go. The passage by which this room has to be reached, if passage it may be called, must be entered from the waterfall room, and a steep ascent must be made until an elevation of 50 feet is reached above the bottom of that room. This ascent has been called Hughes's Slide, as a man of that name once lost his footing at the top and slid on the wet and very slippery clay all the way to the bottom, leaving a very sleek trail. The ascent is difficult, as the soft clay is deep and wet, and the sides are reeking and covered also with soft, yielding clay. When the top of the slide is once reached, a low passage, 6 feet wide and 2 feet high, is discovered, and stooping low, or actually lying flat down, you enter. The top of the passage is of smooth rock, and the bottom is of wet clay with an occasional variation of sharp gravel. The air is good, and as a lizard you start forward. In places the passage widens to 10 or 12 feet, and again narrows to 6 feet. In about 100 feet you encounter a small pond of water filling the whole width of the passage and extending 20 to 30 feet. But the guide tells you it is only 1 foot deep, and calls attention to the fact that the water does not come within a foot of the roof of the passage, and you can easily keep your chin above it. And with this assurance, through you go. Within the next 100 feet, you encounter and pass in the same manner 3 more ponds of varying sizes. The guide calls your attention to the fact that you are not alone, and looking about you by the dim light of your candle, you see numbers of small eyeless salamanders, from 4 inches to 1 foot long. They are peaceable and harmless, appear to have no teeth, and are easily caught if you so desire. Another 100 feet, and the rest room, or Egyptian temple, is reached, and rising to your feet you may rest. The room is small, but contains beautifully fluted walls, resembling basaltic columns, and natural marks of erosion that resemble hieroglyphic inscriptions. From the other side of this room the passage goes on with the same characteristics, but as you enter to go forward, a sound strikes the ear, and you pause to listen. It is a confusion of sounds, a babble of voices, and sounds like a distant conversation carried on by a large number of people. So striking is this resemblance that you instantly ask the guide if there are people in the room ahead, and hardly believe him when he says no. You hear voices of men, voices of boys, babies, girls, and ladies, and occasionally loud laughter. But forward is the word, and on you go, encouraged by the assurance of the guide that you are now over halfway through the passage, and that the sounds came from Blondie's throne room. Suddenly the passage divides into two much alike, and taking the right-hand one, you make your slow advance until at last, with clothes soaked and covered with clay mud, and your strength about gone, you begin to feel desperate and tell the guide that you will go no further, when you see him rise to his feet, and he says, "Here we are." You step over a steep bank of clay and emerge into a large room. It is almost square in shape, about 80 feet long and 60 feet wide and about 50 feet high, with white, smooth walls and a pure white ceiling, and sloping gradually downward on the left ends in a small clear lake of water. This lake has a beautiful beach of white pebbles, and though shallow on the edge, seems quite deep at the center. In fact, it is believed to have there a concealed opening that gives exit to its waters. On the opposite side from you, a stream of clear water pours into the lake, and in doing so, it gives off the sounds that in the passage you mistook for human voices. And this noble stream has been named Mystic River. It enters the lake from under a beautiful natural arch, about 30 feet across at the bottom and 6 feet above the water at the center. The bed of the stream is eroded from strata of sandstone that is extremely hard, containing corundum, and so perfect is its continuity that it conveys sound distinctly for a distance far beyond the reach of the human voice when tapped upon with a hammer. The top of the arch is studded with lovely stalactites, clear as glass, that extend to the outer edge of the arch and form massive and beautiful groups there. Above the arch is a large opening. In truth, the side of the room is out, and a great dark space appears like a curtain of black. A natural path leads up over one side of the arch, and following the lead of the guide, you go up above and learn that a room on the higher level extends off in that direction and gets larger and higher. The walls are stalagmitic columns in cream color and decked in places with blood-red spots or blotches of titanic size. The ceiling you cannot see. It is too high for the lights you have to reach. On the left, you are suddenly confronted by a stalagmitic formation so large and so grand that all others are dwarfed into insignificance. You think of the dome of the Capitol at Washington. You are standing at the sloping base, but cannot see the top. Just here the guide announces in an awestruck voice Blondie's throne. And who is Blondie? Only a fair-haired, blue-eyed, intrepid and daring 15-year-old boy named Charles Smallwood, who assisted the writer in exploring the cave in the early days of 1883, and going on in advance, reported back that he had found another and a greater throne than the great white throne in the auditorium. Well, here we are at Blondie's throne at last, and surveying the base, we find that it is actually only half in the room we are in. The other half forms the side of another room. In a word, The great throne divides the room into two parts and makes two rooms of it instead of one. Yet the one half of the base has a measurement by tape line of 150 feet. The guide now makes preparations to ascend the throne. A chain has been fastened up towards the top, and by taking hold of this, the climb can be made up the sloping sides of the throne. We pass on and up over the clearest and most ice-like formation, resembling the great icebergs seen at sea. Reaching an elevation of 60 feet, an opening into the dome is found, and stooping, you enter. It is a room about 20 feet across, with a white ice-like floor, a roof or ceiling 10 feet above, and from it hang thousands of brilliant stalactites, and from the floor stalagmites rise up to meet them. They are in all sizes, from an inch to 2 feet across. The sides are of the same material, joined and cemented lightly together. Strike any of them, and clear musical notes are given off. A musician has found 2 full octaves. Water is dripping in many places, and in the center of the floor is a tank full of clear water. It is 4 feet wide, 12 feet long, and of unknown depth. On the opposite side of the room from which you enter, there is a hole or opening in the wall. It is large enough to go through, but it goes into the great dark room on the other side of the throne. An abyss confronts you, a sheer precipice which descends for many feet, perhaps hundreds. No man knows. This outer room of Blondie's throne has been named the Chamber of the Fairies. Leaving it and continuing the ascent, the top of the throne is soon reached and is about 20 feet across, and from several points still higher rise stalagmitic spires. The actual height of Blondie's throne is not known, but is probably about 100 feet. Again, look upwards for the ceiling from the dizzy height on top of the throne. You cannot see it. Burn magnesium ribbon and look up, and you see a white ceiling spangled with groups of stalactites. It is surely 100 feet away. Then look off into the unknown room, which is called the Great Beyond. No human being has ever explored or even entered it, but fireballs thrown in reveal the fact that it is of great extent, and part of the bottom water and part land. No way of getting into it has ever yet been found, so its mysteries, lessons, and revelations are still safe from human intrusion. How far it goes, where it stops, and what it leads to are facts for some future explorer to discover. Bats and white salamanders are found in Blondie's throne room, and some larger animals have been heard to jump into the water and escape on the approach of man, but their species is not known. The arched passage of Mystic River has been followed up for a journey of an hour, but further than that its extent is unknown. It was hoped that a way would be thus found into the great beyond, but it did not prove successful. A well-equipped party could find there a chance for some grand discoveries, and it would be one of the notable pleasures of the life of the writer to be one of such a party. The exit from Blondie's throne room is always made with deep regret that the waning lights and meager supplies will not allow a longer stay. The long crawl, the mud, and the water are all forgotten, and notwithstanding the terror of the trip, one feels well repaid. End quote. We thank Mr. Powell for a charming journey without its discomfort and danger, and resume our travels at the waterfall. From the foot of the waterfall, we returned again to the auditorium, in time to enjoy a sight such as we supposed could exist only in a brilliant imagination, and the return at that hour was not a lucky accident of fate, but the result of careful attention to a prearranged design that we should not fail to witness a marvelous display never surpassed by lavish nature. The day outside was one of cloudless summer sunshine. Our eyes having grown accustomed to the dim light of candles in passages where absolute darkness, unrelieved by the stars of midnight, always reigns, the great auditorium appeared before us, softly flooded with daylight diffused from a broad white beam slanting down in long straight lines from the entrance as from a rift in heavy clouds. Only this rift displayed around its edges a brilliant border of vegetation that the rough rocks cherish with tender care. As we stood lost in almost speechless admiration, and without the slightest warning of treasure yet in store, the white beam was stabbed by a narrow, gleaming shaft of yellow sunlight. The glorious, radiant beauty of the picture presented is utterly indescribable, but it was of short duration, and in a few seconds the golden blade was withdrawn as suddenly as it had appeared. If the genius of Elkins had been granted the privilege we enjoyed, the artist world of Europe that graciously yielded the highest honor to his Sunbeam on Mount Shasta would have knelt in rapturous humility. Speaking of his great work, as we stood before it only a few months before his death, Mr. Elkins said quietly, "It is no great achievement. I simply painted it exactly as it looked. Anyone could do the same. But no one ever has." The white beam was more enduring, and by its aid we were able to view the expanse of the great auditorium far better than could have been done in the momentary glare of any brilliant artificial light. Every part of the cloud-gray walls shows a stratification as regularly horizontal as if the laying of each course had been done with the assistance of line and level, while in every direction are now seen hundreds of stalactites that had not been noticed before, and although they look small, the average length, taken with the surveying instruments, is 14 feet. The hill beneath the entrance is an accumulation of debris drifted in from the outside, and rising to a height of more than 125 feet, while the great circumference of its supporting base, revealed by the banishment of shadows, suggests the possibility of tragic history of which the only evidence lies buried there and may or may not ever be discovered. But let us step lightly, since our feet may press the covering that shields a final sleep, and also let a grieving sister in her old age take comfort in the knowledge that here, as in few other spots, nature provides a certain and gentle burial for the unfortunate, and for a few seconds each day lights the dim chamber with a heavenly glory, perhaps in appeal to the sons of one country to harbor no such feelings as deprived Abel of life, and for all time and eternity tarnished the honor of Cain. The chilliness presently recalled us from further indulgence in that great scene to ordinary affairs, and consulting the reliable thermometer, It was found to register 42 degrees Fahrenheit, while in some of the lower passages the temperature is 58 degrees Fahrenheit, but the variation is not in accordance with the accepted theory of 1 degree to the 100 feet descent. A return to the beautiful Spring of Youth room was now a necessity, but we were careful to allow no drop of water falling from clay-stained hands to reach the purity of that lovely bowl, and then, being happy and hungry, we retired to the piano's protecting tent for refreshment. The atmosphere in Marble Cave has the peculiar bracing and invigorating quality common to the majority of caves that seems almost to defy fatigue and encourage exertion that under ordinary conditions would be impossible. After the exertion necessary in the warmer portions of the cave, the temperature of 42 degrees Fahrenheit proved rather low for comfort, and finally was admitted to be a sufficient reason for either leaving the cave or sending out for the wraps. Slowly and reluctantly, the party walked up the long winding path to the summit of the hill where the stairway finds support, stopping many times to admire again the perfect curves and fine color tones of that wonderful high arch, within a mountain yet softly radiant with the light of day. Still lingering regretfully among the fern-decked rocks before quite finishing the ascent to the actual outside world, the mercury lost little time in registering 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Since no official or even approximately correct map of Marble Cave has yet been published, and the desirability of maps is particularly urged by Monsieur E. A. Martel, a special effort was made to secure one, which was accompanied by the following remarks from Mr. Prince in regard to its incompleteness. Quote, "There are several passages and rooms which do not appear on the map, though some of them are well known, but have not been surveyed and platted. Much further exploration is possible in this great cavern. Lost River Canyon ends abruptly in a bank of red clay, the volume of water being undiminished. The water from the Great Fall flows by a small serpentine into a passage which has never been followed up, its entrance being several hundred feet higher than the nearest water level." End quote. Unfortunately, the quantity of water in the cave at the time of the visit just described was so unusually great as to render the Lost River Canyon trip impossible. During the previous season, the cave and its surroundings were visited by a prominent naturalist who appears to have been delightfully liberal in the diffusion of scientific knowledge and the explanations of methods of pursuing investigations. His practical instruction in snake catching is particularly interesting, as it was never before introduced into this state where the copperhead and rattler are known to have survived among the fittest. Seeing a snake hole and desiring information as to the family record of the proprietor, he inserted a finger, and while waiting for results, explained that there is no better way to secure a specimen, as the enraged reptile will fasten its fangs into the intruding member and then can be easily withdrawn. It is a pleasure to state that even snakes recognize the claims of friendship and no injury was experienced. Footnote: the naturalist referred to is the late Professor E. D. Cope. End footnote. In the vicinity of Marble Cave, there are several choice varieties of onyx and marble, among them a rare and beautiful onyx in black and yellow. The coloring, tinting, and banding of onyx seem generally to be regarded as one of the unexplainable mysteries of nature, but is in reality an extremely simple process that can be easily studied in any active cave. When the percolating acidulated water passes slowly through a pure limestone, it is filtered of impurities and deposits a crystal, either pure white or transparent. If it comes in contact with metallic bodies of any kind, it carries away more or less in solution to act as coloring matter. The beautiful pale green onyx in several Missouri counties taking its tint from the copper. In South Dakota, manganese in various combinations produces black and many shades of brown. In both states, an excessive flow of water often carries a quantity of red or yellow clay, which temporarily destroys the beauty of exposed surfaces, but in after years becomes a fine band of brilliant color. Small wind caves are numerous in the Ozarks and, being cold, are frequently utilized for preservation of domestic supplies. The entrance to one in the neighborhood of Marble Cave is high up on the hillside south of Mr. Powell's house, and being visible from the porch was too tempting to be ignored, and the walk up to it for a better view was rewarded with a most charming bit of scenery as well. All the quiet valley, divided by a rushing little stream, lay before us in the shadow of early evening, while to the north and east the hills were brilliant in summer sunshine, with one small open glade gleaming vividly among the darker shades of forest green. The cave was a very small room at the bottom of a steep, rocky sloping passage, and contained no standing water, although there had been a heavy rainfall the night before, and the opening is so situated as to especially favor the inflow, which naturally indicates a greater cave beneath a hidden passage. Here, as in most of the caves of the region, is found a small lizard. It is totally blind, but its ancestors evidently were not, as is shown by conspicuous protuberances where the eyes should be, but over which the skin is drawn without a wrinkle or seam to indicate a former opening. These harmless creatures are not scaly, but are clothed in a soft, shining, well-fitted skin, and the largest seen were little more than 6 inches long. Those who love perfect nature in a most smiling mood should hasten to visit Marble Cave while yet no railroad quite touches the county. Stay tuned for the next segment from Cave Regions of the Ozarks and Black Hills by Luella Agnes Owen. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Vanzaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg for helping me find many interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.